Hi, my name is Joanne. I had a very difficult childhood, but I remember, since I was very young, I really loved writing stories. My parents were poor and neither of whom had been to college. They used to say,
"Your overactive imagination is an amusing personal quirk.
You will never pay a mortgage or secure a salary."
I'm one of the most disorganized people in the world and, as I later proved, the worst secretary ever. All I ever liked about working in offices was being able to type up stories on the computer when no one was looking. I was never paying much attention in meetings because I was usually scribbling bits of my latest stories in the margins of the pad or choosing excellent names for my characters. When I was 15, my mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I was very unhappy. I think it was a dreadful time of life. So, when I was 25, my mother died. Then I decided to move to Portugal to teach English. There I met the love of my life, a television journalist, and got married. Soon we had a beautiful daughter. I was so happy. But pretty soon, my charming knight would happen to be an abusive, violent partner. A year later we got divorced. So, I decided to move back to Britain. Without a job, I visited different Edinburgh cafes and hunkered down to write my novel. I often brought along my daughter, who slept in a pram next to me. During that period, I lived off government welfare. I'd been as poor as it's possible to go in the UK, without being homeless, for a couple years. I was a single parent. Patronage was almost as hard to bear as stigmatization. The fears of my parents and mine have become real. I was the biggest failure I knew. I became severely depressed and sought professional help. Depression is the most unpleasant thing I have ever experienced. For a few years I did feel I was on a psychic treadmill, trying to keep up with where I was. We are not talking that I felt a little bit miserable. We are talking about suicidal thoughts. I used my experience of depression to describe characters for my books. It was entirely conscious. Entirely from my own experience. When I finally finished my first book, I received a lot of rejection letters. 12 actually. But one day my book was accepted by a small publisher. After a year, he made a deal to print 500 copies and secured me a £2,000 advance. I couldn't believe it. But the publisher anticipated, boys may not want to read books written by a woman. So, it suggested to pick a pen name with 2 initials. The J stands for Joanne, my real name. I had no middle name, so she picked K for the name of my paternal grandmother. 2 years later, 300,000 copies were sold in the UK. Do you know which was its name? Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I couldn't grasp what had happened. I could buy my own house. A month after the movie's release, I got remarried and later had a son. I was the first person to become a billionaire by writing books. Later, I dropped off the list because I gave so much money to charity. Looking back, there is something I want to tell you about. Failure. Failure in life is inevitable. It is impossible to live without failing at something, unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default. Overcoming failure gave me big inner security. It taught me things about myself that I could not have learned no other way. You will never truly know yourself or the strength of your relationships until both have been tested by adversity. Always trust in your strength. Thank you for watching my real story. Please subscribe to watch more real stories like mine.